new information revealed about the Justice Department's investigation about how former President Trump allegedly handled classified White House documents. In a filing Tuesday night, the DOJ alleged, quote, obstructive conduct occurred at Mar-a-Lago in an effort by Trump's legal team to move or hide certain records from investigators in the months leading up to the FBI search. The Justice Department also asked a federal judge to reject Trump's request to appoint a special master, which could review materials seized from Mar-a-Lago by the FBI. The DOJ claims a third party would be unnecessary and would significantly harm important government interests. For more on this, I want to bring in Robert Costa and David Weinstein. Robert is our CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. David is a partner with the Jones Walker law firm and a former federal prosecutor. Bob, let's start with you. What stood out to you about the filing? Any surprises?
The surprise was the photograph of material collected at former President Trump's Florida home with classified markings, top secret markings, the three letters HCS, meaning that some of that information was likely derived from human sources and presented to the president as intelligence material. So this is a serious moment for the investigation as it reveals more about what it collected in that early August search of the former president's home.
David, the Justice Department is suggesting that classified materials stored at Mar-a-Lago were more than likely moved and hidden as the government sought their return. If that is in fact true, what are the potential legal implications for the former president?
Well, quite frankly, if he's involved with that, or people around him are involved with that, conspiring or aiding and abetting, that's a 20-year statutory maximum penalty. Those are serious allegations and a serious crime to be committing when the department, as well as the National Records Agency, are asking for these documents back. And the documents that are classified that Robert just talked about, those aren't supposed to be anywhere other than in a secure, safe location, a SCIF somewhere, presumably up in Washington, D.C. So these are all very serious issues to be confronted.
David, there was a federal judge in Florida that is going to begin hearing arguments, I believe, on Thursday about Trump's request for that special master. That person would conduct an independent review of the materials seized from Mar-a-Lago. Walk us through how that process would work. I mean, does somebody just take an office for a week and literally go through it and basically say, yes, what the DOJ is saying is true and I agree with them? How does the special master process work?
Well, it wouldn't be even as simple as that. First, you'd have to identify what privilege this special master is looking at. They've alleged two here. Executive privilege, which the Department of Justice says doesn't exist with regard to the former president. He isn't standing in a position where he can assert that. And then attorney-client privilege. And so they've identified some of these potentially attorney-client privilege documents. The third category of information, this classified information, that's not something they want the special master to look at. So what the special master would do is that he or she would review those privileged materials that were seized, not everything, just the privileged materials, and determine whether or not there was a privilege that could be asserted over a particular item or document. And if that was the case, the special master would recommend that that item not be given to the law enforcement side of this investigation.
A follow-up question here, and help me because I've wondered this. What does the Trump team mean when they say that, oh, well, he's president, so he can declassify whatever he wants? I mean, are they essentially saying up until a certain point, at which point he was no longer the president, he could have said declassify everything? I mean, I'm not understanding this whole, well, he's the president, he can declassify whatever he wants.
The president of the United States has certain powers to ask for certain materials to, in fact, be declassified, to take away those classifications. But number one, you have to be the president. And number two, there are processes that still follow that involve review by national security, review by people who have classified these to determine whether or not they can be declassified. It's not a magic wand, David. You can't just wave it and say it's declassified. There are proper processes and procedures that have to take place.
Bob, talk to me about running for re-election, well, running to be elected again if he in fact does it. So he's still reportedly weighing the decision to run in 2024. I mean, is this news delaying what could be a potential announcement?
For allies and associates of former President Trump, this is a moment politically and legally where they face uncertainty. The former president continues to tell people publicly and privately that he is leaning toward another run for president in 2024, a run for the Republican presidential nomination. At the same time, he's facing legal scrutiny across so many fronts: New York State, Manhattan, the Georgia special grand jury down there. In Florida, you have the ongoing federal probe. You have the Capitol Hill investigation. You have a grand jury in Washington on January 6th. All of that, it hovers over the Trump decision on 2024, and it's led some other Republicans to look at the possible race and say to themselves, well, maybe Trump runs, maybe he doesn't, but there could be room for someone else to get in there and present themselves to the Republican Party as an option. That's why Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, traveling the country, says he's focused on his reelection bid, but he's being talked about by donors as someone who could be an alternative to Trump should Trump be politically or legally damaged or decide not to run. Another name being mentioned is Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, among many others like Senator Ted Cruz and others in the Senate as options out there. But for now, Trump continues to maintain his line that he's looking at 2024, hasn't made a decision, but he's certainly looking at it with seriousness.
Bob, I got one more question for you. I listen to David and I think to myself, okay, that guy's a former federal prosecutor, and he's basically saying there's a real chance that Donald Trump could get charged here. But you talk to a Trump supporter and they say, there's no way he's going to jail. I just want your analysis on that point because I know you're hearing the same thing.
It's going to be a decision that's up to the Justice Department. And does it rise to the level of criminality and criminal intent? Now, when it comes to something like the Espionage Act, which deals with the possession of defense documents, you may not even need the idea of criminal intent, but you could have gross negligence. You could have a crime in that sense of just having possession of documents that you should not have, being an illegal act. At the same time, what you're looking at is an escalating outline of a possible case of obstruction from the government, saying that Trump and his lawyers, in their view, have not had appropriate engagement with them throughout the past few months.
Bob Costa, David Weinstein, thank you both.
You're welcome.